Debbie Almontaser, straight from New York,
Yeah.
straight from Bodega Strike Organization. She's an internationally recognized award-winning educator, entrepreneur, speaker, and authority on cross-cultural understanding. She was the founder and former principal of the Khalil Gibran International Academy in Brooklyn, New York. That was in the news a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
2007.
Yeah. Time flies.
Yeah.
Time flies when you're dealing with Islamophobia. She was, before that, a 25-year veteran of the New York City public school system, where she taught special education, inclusion, trained teachers in literacy, and served as multicultural specialist and diversity advisor. Currently, she's the board president of the Muslim Community Network and sits on the boards of the Yemeni American Merchants Association, Therapy and Learning Center, Preschool, Engage National, and the AGC National. She's here to talk to us today about her new book, Leading While Muslim, of which there are copies for purchase in the back at what must be a very reasonable price.
Usually you should order from Amazon, always like half the price. I always make this
Say,
mistake.
the bookstore representative is here.
Okay.
So, no, we're not going to order from Amazon because we know Georgetown Bookstore is more reasonable.
And on Amazon, they're the same price.
Oh, good.
So.
And the Georgetown Bookstore is more reasonable.
What's your kickback?
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, assalamu alaikum, peace and greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for having me present my book, Leading While Muslim. It's really an honor to come to Georgetown and have this opportunity. For those of you who may have read my book, you know that the foreword was actually written by Dr. John Esposito, who has been really a big supporter and a mentor to me, and I really appreciate his work. And when I first ventured in the writing of this book, he and I spoke, and he was like, go for this, you have to make this happen. And so I'm really delighted to be at a center that he actually created that provides the opportunity for people to come together and speak on important issues. So Leading While Muslim is actually a study that I did for my dissertation in my doctoral program back in 2016. It focuses specifically on American Muslim principles, or what I call school leaders. And what I wanted to do within this study is actually look at three things. Whether or not the lived experiences of American Muslim school leaders were impacted by the political discourse, which is what we hear every day in the media, the global events, sadly and unfortunately the events that occur everywhere across the world, and the media coverage of Islam and Muslims. And so I wanted to see whether the lived experiences of these school leaders in the aftermath of 9/11 were impacted or not. Within the study, I actually focused on 14 people who participated in the study. Originally, I found 20 people across the United States, but only 14 agreed to be a part of the study. The other 6 were too afraid because they felt that their experiences were so unique that their school districts would actually recognize them based on what they had encountered in their school district. I first started in New York City, trying very hard to get some of the Muslim principals that actually work there to participate. The couple that I reached out via email and then phone call, and I didn't get calls back, I finally heard back a message from them via email saying, please don't ever email us or call us. We are not interested to be a part of anything that you're working on. I didn't take that personally. That was coming from a place of fear of being retaliated against if they actually participated. And because they saw what happened to me as a school leader in New York City, they were very afraid that that could actually happen to them if they participated. So the study has 6 men and 8 women. Not surprising that the field of education K-12 was mostly women. Within this demographics, there are actually 6 African American Muslims, which people are always surprised to hear, African American Muslims. 3 of them are women, and the other 3 are men. There are 6 Arab Americans, 4 women and 2 men, and they actually are from different parts of the Middle East. Some of them were born in the United States, some of them were born outside of the United States. One who was born in Tanzania, of Indian descent, and one who was actually Pakistani, born and raised in Pakistan, but came to the United States and became a school leader. So within the book, I actually focus on 4 individuals. Though I did the study on 14, I wanted to keep the book very short so that way people can read it and focus specifically on using this as a tool for dialogue and engagement within their communities. The 4 people within the book, and I'm going to just go over some of their stories so that way you can have an idea. The first is Najla. Najla has an Arab American background. She became a teacher prior to 9/11. She was teaching for a couple of years in an elementary school. And one of her aspirations was actually to become a school leader one day. September 11th happened while she was teaching. And she remembers that day walking into the auditorium to see what her fellow colleagues were actually watching, and found that they were watching TV with the Twin Towers burning. And she immediately asked them, "What are you watching? What is going on?" And there was this dead silence in the room. Finally, one of them turned to her and said, "Arabs and Muslims did this to us." And all of them looked at her with piercing looks that she just couldn't say anything, do anything. She was horrified. She ran out of that auditorium, back into her classroom, and literally climbed underneath her desk and just cried there hysterically from what she had experienced and what she knew was to unfold, sadly, for her and members of her community. In the days and weeks after 9/11, she saw a lot of people within the American Muslim community where she lived being attacked, being discriminated against. A couple of years later, she decided to actually go into a leadership program for becoming a principal. In her coursework, there were students that she was working with, and one of the people within the district basically said to her, "Najla, if you really want to become a school leader, then you need to change your wardrobe if you want that to happen." Now we know what that is talking about. It's code language for take your hijab off if you really are serious about your career. And so sadly, Najla was in a position that she had to make the choice between being an observant Muslim, physically, and between her career. And agonizing over this for the many months that she continued to be in the program, she eventually decided to take off the hijab. She then became an assistant principal in her district. A few years later, became a principal. And today, Najla is actually an assistant superintendent in her district. However, she continues without hijab and feeling this guilt of having to make such a sacrifice in order to be accepted in her school district as a school leader. The next person that you see is Rula. Rula was a very, very fascinating woman. She actually took on the leadership of a charter school that was on the brink of closing. She took the school, was able to get it to an A grade by the second year, an A grade the third year, and then the school board decided to actually hire an executive director that would help her with the public relations, and so she could just focus on school instruction and professional development for the staff. They included her in the process to actually choose an executive director. They narrowed it down to 2 individuals by the end of the school year. She gave them her choice. She went off on school break, came back in September, and found that they did not hire either of those 2 people that they narrowed it down to. Well, who they ended up hiring was actually a 9/11 family member. In their first encounter, after being introduced and sitting down to chit-chat and start to get to know one another, the executive director asked Rula, "Are you Muslim? Is your husband Muslim? And are you a practicing Muslim?" Rula knew that her employer should not be asking these questions, that it was against the law to ask these kinds of questions. But in her heart of hearts, she decided to engage her in the conversation and thought she can win her over. Sadly, Rula was not able to win this woman over. Rula spent the entire year under duress with microaggressions and a number of attacks on her professionalism, her academic integrity, and her standing as a school leader. By spring, Rula was under so much physical duress that she actually fainted in the school, taken out by EMS, taken to the hospital, hospitalized for 2 weeks. The school executive director did not check on her, the school board did not check on her, and eventually when she was released from the hospital and went back to the work, she actually submitted an extensively long letter chronicling what she had endured the entire school year by this executive director. Sadly, Rula did not get the justice that she thought she should from the school board. At the end of the year, they sent her a letter, which she gets every year to renew her contract, except this year it wasn't an invitation to renew her contract. It was a letter saying, "Thank you for your service, we will be hiring someone else." But what is more devastating in Rula's situation is because of the physical and emotional stress that she underwent, she now lives with seizures for life and has to take medication from that experience for the rest of her life. Sadly, I met Rula 2 years and 1 week after this incident happened to her. I wish that I met her 8 days earlier because she would have had the opportunity to file a lawsuit against this school board for what she had experienced. Some of the microaggressions that she faced, for example, was the executive director decided to bring Italian sausages to work. And in the office, she went around and started giving it to each person. She walks over to Rula and says, "Oh, you don't eat pork, so you will never have the opportunity to know what they taste like." And I can recount for you a number of others, but for the sake of moving forward, I just wanted to give you a picture of what Rula experienced. The next person is Aziz, and Aziz was a very, very fascinating man because he is an African-American school leader who is actually leading a high school. When Aziz walks through the room, you can see authority radiate from this man. Well-built, very handsome, well-dressed, and when he walks into the room where people don't know him, he sees how they are perceiving him. But the moment that Aziz introduces himself and says, "My name is Aziz Mahmoud," he sees the look of puzzlement on people's faces, and that radiation and sense of authority that he walked in with starts to dissipate based on what he feels in that room. And this is something that he lives with every time that he meets brand new people who encounter him. Aziz's story is very interesting. He 1 year hired a couple of Muslim educators. In addition to that, he had several students who were actually Muslim and wanted to make Jummah prayer. His staff, after hiring them, requested that they be permitted to make Jummah, which is the obligatory prayer on Fridays for Muslims. He created a flexible schedule for them to be able to leave the school building and come right back and resume their teaching. The students who requested to make Jummah in a nearby mosque also had permission slips from their parents, and he was able to let them go. Sadly, months after this began, someone decided to report him to his district that he was promoting Islam. Aziz, his teachers, his students, the whole entire faculty went under investigation. He spent the entire school year in turmoil, wondering if he was going to have his job or not. He was brought in for an interdisciplinary hearing, and at the hearing, they accused him of promoting Islam because he was seen walking children to the mosque. He too was actually going to the mosque to make his prayers. And what they told him, because he wasn't doing anything against the law, was from now on he could not walk with the children. He had to let the children leave ahead, or for him to go by himself before they exited the building, but he is not to interact with the children going to the mosque. Sadly, what this did to Aziz was make him distance himself from these Muslim youth within his building. What a missed opportunity for them to actually bond with the school leader who's of their faith background, who actually could be a role model for them, to then distance himself. Not only did he distance himself from his students, but he even refused to engage in any conversation about Islam and Muslims, because he did not want to be put in that situation again. And so luckily he was acquitted, but it left him always feeling very guarded and with an unconscious fear of something else may happen that will jeopardize his job. The last person is Ayman. Ayman was actually one of my favorite participants in the study. When I first reached out to him, he said to me, "I'm not the kind of Muslim you want to include in your study." And I'm like, "What do you mean you're not the kind of Muslim?" He's like, "Well, I don't pray, I don't fast, I'm not religious, I really don't, I don't even associate myself with Islam anymore." And I said, "No, you are perfect for my study. Please, I want you to be a part of the study." So I sat down, I interviewed him, the first set of interview questions, and then a follow-up. And as I sat there in the first set of questions and interviewing him, there was so much pain that I personally was undergoing to hear him say negative things about Islam and Muslims. He believed in his heart of hearts that what is happening to Muslims in America and globally is all the Muslim community's fault. He believed that Muslim clerics and leaders in the United States and elsewhere are complacent, that they are not condemning what's happening, that they are not educating the public, and that is why Islam and Muslims are in such a state. Now, what's interesting about Ayman was he was very disconnected from the American Muslim community where he actually lived and taught and led, and was around people who espoused these kinds of thoughts and feelings about Islam and Muslims. And so after my interviews, and I actually had my dissertation published, I sent him a 2-page letter with also numerous of links to see the advocacy and the social justice position that American Muslims have taken, as well on a global level, for him to see that, yes, Muslims are really doing something about the state of what is happening to Muslims. But what's sad and unfortunate with Ayman is, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy when you hear it over and over and over again. that you start to believe these things. And in his case, that was the case, and it was really unfortunate. So what I want to talk about next is the emerging themes within the book. The themes that emerge, and for those of you, I think everybody here is in academia, this was a phenomenological study, and the conceptual framework that I actually used was Political Spectacle by Murray Edelman. Are people familiar with Murray Edelman's work? Okay, you should definitely read it. So Murray Edelman basically talks about political spectacle in everything that we engage in as a society. What we are seeing right now with Representative Ilhan Omar is a political spectacle. What we are seeing right now with Donald Trump is a political spectacle. It is people creating rhetoric that actually tries to change the minds of individuals and gets people to believe one thing over another. And then you have two sides. One that's saying, no, this is not true, and one that's saying this is actually true, and the two are constantly colliding to get public opinion to change in their favor. And so these principals, these school leaders, are actually within a political spectacle in their school community, their school district, by the things that are continually happening to them. Whether it is based on the political rhetoric that is being said, whether it is, unfortunately, by a global event that is occurring, or the negative things about Islam and Muslims in the media. They felt under attack every time that something was actually happening. And when I asked them, well, what do you think is creating this political climate? And their response was really interesting. They believed that the hysteria and fear that was generating anxiety, not just for them, but also their counterparts, were orchestrated by Al-Qaeda, ISIS, neoconservatives, white supremacists, and GOP candidates. So every time that these entities drummed up the negative things, they felt the political climate rising. I asked them about the role of the media. Within both interviews, I was able to count the number of times that they actually mentioned the word media. They mentioned the word media 143 times. And they felt that the media was actually perpetuating the negative images of Islam and Muslims, and were not providing fair and adequate coverage of Islam and Muslims. And gave more platform for ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and white supremacists to drum up the negative things about Islam and Muslims. The next is inferior and foreign. This was really, really fascinating to see that they all felt that inferiority and feeling foreign. And especially the women who were in hijab felt that more than those who were not in hijab. And those who had Muslim sounding names felt it more than others. And I gave you the example of Aziz. Before saying his name, he was perceived as African American. But once he said his name, everything else changed. The African American Muslim women who are actually hijab wearing women, they told me that they had to actually prove themselves 3 times more than their counterparts. And I asked them to help me understand that. And they said to me that because they were African American, they were Muslim, and they were women, that those are the 3 reasons that make them feel that they have to prove themselves 3 times more. And that was really interesting. The next is unconscious fear. Each and every one of them, in everything they said, in everything that they did, always thought twice about what's to come out of their mouth, making sure that they are not perceived as promoting Islam, or that they had any radical views, or that people should be suspect of them. And sadly, a number of people were suspect of them throughout the counters of their lives. And so second to last, actually spirituality, was actually, I asked them about their spiritual lives. How were they actually able to be spiritual, and whether they were or not. Sadly, within the number of individuals that I interviewed, only 2 of the men were actually going to make Friday prayer. The rest were too afraid to ask for permission from their superintendents because they did not want to be perceived as being radical or an observant Muslim that they have to worry about. One in particular, when I asked him, he said, you know, I'm afraid that if I leave my school building and one of my students gets shot through the window and I'm at the mosque, the headline will not read, a student was shot in an inner city school. The headline would read, a student was shot while a Muslim principal was at the mosque. And he was like, I can't afford to be in that kind of position. Another school leader, and this story is really very fascinating. I always get emotional when I tell his story. He's the only one in his state. And because he felt such guilt about being able to be practicing and also leading, he was able to actually find a mosque in his state that live streamed Jummah. So every day, he'd walk into his office on Friday, and he would tell his secretary, for the next half hour, you are not to call me or knock on the door unless it's an emergency. He would lock his door, he would turn on the live stream, and he would watch the khutbah. And then he would roll out his carpet and pray. When he shared this with me, it was very, very emotional for me because we live in a country that was founded on religious freedom. He and all American Muslim educators in public education should have the right to be able to observe their day of Sabbath, which only requires an hour at max. For him to have to do this in secret and have to go to the extent of finding a mosque that actually was doing live stream is heartbreaking. And so the moral imperative here from my research is that we need to help these individuals in being able to live in their skin and not to live in fear and to be able to practice. And so I'm just going to quickly go through, I'm not going to read it to you, you can read it yourself. These are the conclusions based on the study. And then these are the recommendations. These are the calls to action within the book. The need for studies on American Muslim educators in public education. I am the only one to date that has actually studied school leaders in public education. There is a great deal of literature on principals, school leaders in Islamic schools, as well as teachers in Islamic schools, but there is no body of work on American Muslim educators in public education. Research that provides Muslim educators with support and encouragement to seek principalship. The fact that I only found 20 across the United States is a devastating statistic. Each and every district should have school leadership that reflects the very students in its classrooms. And so this is a call on universities to do extensive recruitment from diverse communities to make sure that there is Muslim leadership in education. Workshops focused on Muslims in America to encourage dialogue amongst school communities. School districts need to take this responsibility and educate their headquarters staff, as well as their principals and guidance counselors, not just for the school leaders or for the teachers, but for the very students that are sitting in their classrooms. Curriculum including the study of Islam and Muslims in America it is imperative that they have curriculum that is, accurate and fair in representation. I don't know how many of you just heard yesterday about the Pearson textbook actually having very negative chapter on Islam and Muslims in America that actually talks about 9/11 within the context of this chapter on Islam and Muslims. And this is something that needs to be challenged because we should not be talked about as a community from our history and then ending at that point. In addition, partnerships with organizations that conduct professional development and presentations on Islam. There are a number of organizations such as ING and a number of other Muslim faith-based organizations that provide this. A national organization for American Muslim principals and assistant principals, an association or a support group that would actually help and connect them to one another and provide them support. And lastly, policy that allows American Muslim school leaders and employees to attend religious services on Friday afternoons. This needs to become a policy across the United States where they get this opportunity. This is nothing new to any of the Abrahamic faiths. Within New York, when I was growing up, my Christian peers used to be taken for religious instruction on Wednesday afternoons at 1 o'clock with public school busing. In New York City, the Jewish community on Fridays, when it's daylight saving time, when it gets darker earlier, the Jewish Orthodox community is given the opportunity to leave work early so they could be in their homes in time for Sabbath. It is time that American Muslims in public education, in the public sector, in government jobs to have the opportunity to be able to make their Friday prayer. So I'm going to end here. Thank you so much. And I look forward to questions and a dialogue with Dr. Brown.